Good morning. Welcome to the program. Today is Monday, June 9th, 2025, and as promised, defense attorney Tony Cotton is in studio. I would say welcome back to the program, but this is your first time being at our studios here at the 3rd Street Market Hall, right?
Yeah, it's great here.
So, are you glad it's over?
Thank God.
Okay. So I want to start at the very, very beginning. So when the public found out that you would be representing Maxwell Anderson, the amount of hate that you got, the online threats that you got, not just you, but your entire family, talk about the shock of that, because everybody knows that no matter what crime you get accused of, everybody gets a defense. Did you expect to get all the hate that you got when you agreed to take on your client?
I don't know if many of your listeners will remember Jerry Boyle, who was a very well-known defense lawyer back in the day. He actually did the Jeffrey Dahmer case. And Jerry was a close friend of mine. He was an elderly man, obviously, when I first got hired on this case. He's since passed away. But I remember Jerry came to my office, and he said when he did the Dahmer case, he didn't, and that was a white guy who had targeted the African-American community. There was all sorts of horrible things that had happened there. And he said he didn't have any real blowback or pushback or threats or anything like that. And he goes, Tony, I just think it's a different era now. I think people are, on their computers and behind their monitors, and they get worked up about things in a different way than they used to. And I thought that was a really profound way to look at it. Like, I didn't expect in a million years that I was going to be attacked the way that I was for doing a job that the Constitution says I'm supposed to do.
When you started to look at not just the accusation, but the overwhelming amount of evidence, as a defense attorney, obviously you have to make sure that your client is well represented. But at what point were you like, okay, let me just make sure this guy has a fair trial? An acquittal might be difficult, an exoneration might be difficult. At what point were you so overwhelmed by the evidence you had to kind of pivot in what your strategy was in defending Maxwell Anderson?
Well, this was a weird case because almost every week there was new evidence coming in. They had the FBI working on it, Milwaukee Police Department, the Sheriff's Department. They had every government agency, the Cudahy Police Department. So when you have all those different agencies working on the case, they're all sending in their reports and their evidence as time goes on. So every week we were getting more and more evidence. We were getting, and then of course, tragically, body parts were being found as time went by too. So then those would go to the crime lab and the medical examiner's office, and we had DNA reports coming in, bus videos coming in. It was just constant. And I think, for me at least, it was very early on that you could look at the sort of the snapshot of the government's case and see this is not a weak case. And I never sold it as a weak case to anybody, whether I was talking to the family or the client. I mean, this was always one that had an overwhelming amount of evidence, unfortunately, for my client.
Was there one particular piece of evidence where when it was revealed, you were just like, oh, it's over. This is the damning thing. Was there was a lot of evidence, obviously, but was there one thing in particular where you just put your head in your hands and shook your head?
I thought there was a few things that were really bad in the case. I mean, I thought the bus video of him walking away from the car was a bad piece of evidence. I thought his ties to Warnemont Beach were a bad piece of evidence. But and this is just why you never really know what a jury's doing. And sometimes when you're working a case and you're preparing a defense, you start to think to yourself, oh, I can neutralize this and I can neutralize that. I've effectively given an explanation for this piece of evidence. And normally what we do as defense lawyers is we always have bad facts in every case. Every person who's charged with a crime, something bad comes across our desk. They have DNA, they have a confession, they have an eyewitness. And so usually you identify the worst piece of evidence and you try to neutralize it. Here it was hard to say what was the worst piece because there was 5, 6, or 7 bad pieces of evidence, any one of which felt to me like it could result in a guilty verdict sort of standing alone. But the most glaring absent piece of evidence was the fact that there was uncertainty as to how she died, the circumstances of the death, where the death happened, how the death happened. And I thought, yes, there were bad pieces of evidence, as there are in any case, but there was this glaring absence in this case of how are they going to prove that this was an intentional act. I really thought at the end of the day, and maybe this is just me putting my lawyer hat on or being naive, or people can criticize however they want. I just thought there was an absence of evidence of an intentional act. Maybe they convict on the arson, maybe they convict on the mutilation. I felt like the homicide, there was certainly a shot on that.
So there was plenty of ways in which you could have raised reasonable doubt. Tell us about the jury, because as I understand, the jury was heavily female, which cannot be in your favor at all, right?
People ask me, like, what's your ideal juror for a case where somebody is killed and their body parts are chopped up and scattered around the city? And I don't know any jury consultant who could tell you this is the right juror for this type of case. I don't know that any juror is better or worse than anyone else. It's a bad fact pattern. The evidence is gruesome. We spent a lot of time trying to get a group of fair jurors. We spent a whole day on jury selection in this case. We had jury questionnaires. We learned a lot of information about people. I didn't think that women were worse than men. So I didn't look at it as we need more men or more African Americans or less African Americans. I felt like based on the questions we saw people giving the feedback to us in their questionnaires, I felt like we had a group of fair jurors. I still think that. I mean, they spent 2 weeks listening to this evidence. And I don't think this is a type of case where it didn't go his way because we had too many women on the jury, for example.
Defense attorney Tony Cotton is in studio. He most recently represented Maxwell Anderson in the death of Sade Robinson. The media coverage, the local media coverage of this case, folks may not recall, but this is like April of 2024. And then there would be, a huge story where it'd be all in our local news, and then it'd be quiet for a while, and then it would resurge again. How did you respond to that? Because for a while, it seemed like you got a break. People went on with their lives, they're focused on other things, and then boom, some more evidence comes out or something happens where, there's a new development in the case and you're right on top of the headlines again. How did you deal with that ebb and that flow of the calm and then the storm for an entire year that you were involved with this case?
Yeah, if if I ever take on a project like even remotely similar to this in the future, I'll have a much better perspective on sort of how to balance my life, because you're right. Like when it would go into the news, things would blow up and I would start getting messages and phone calls and emails and people,
not always pleasant,
mostly unpleasant. Okay. Yeah. And so it takes a toll on everybody. My staff we have a great staff. I've got 4 full-time paralegals, but everybody at our office was really buried working on this case. I don't want to say exclusively, but this was just such a huge project for everybody to take on.
Knowing what you know now, knowing the reputation hit that I think you took temporarily, I think at the end of the day, because he was found guilty, that's almost like your best saving grace, because had there been reasonable doubt raised and this guy walks free, they're gonna look at you as the enemy, even though I would say you were doing your job as a defense attorney, knowing what you know, knowing what you went through. If a case like this, and God forbid something like this ever happens again, would you second guess or maybe think twice before taking a high profile murder case, African American woman in a majority minority city? Do you have some kind of pause in taking a case like this again?
I think honestly, one of my best attributes is also one of my worst attributes, and it's that my default is to say yes to things. People come into my office regardless of race or their background or their history. I tend to say yes, and I want to take on people's projects and help them through difficult situations. Right now, I'd like to say no, that I wouldn't jump into something like this, but knowing myself the way I do, I think I would. I probably would, regardless of race or circumstances, if somebody came in and said, hey, my son is in trouble and he needs help and they can afford it, I think I would, I don't know, I probably would end up jumping into it.
Speaking with defense attorney Tony Cotton, did they offer a plea? Did
No.
they say, hey,
No.
They didn't?
No.
They said, we want to take this one all the way.
I mean, the ball was in our court, so I mean, it's something that the discussion was basically, if you want to explore a plea deal, come to us and tell us what you think is appropriate for a case like this, and we'll tell you whether or not we agree with that. We didn't even explore that, though. I mean, as your listeners probably know, you don't make plea deals for people unless you're authorized to do that by the client. What
was your ultimate strategy? At the end of the day, here's the strategy that we want to employ for this individual. What was that strategy? To the extent you can tell us.
Yeah, I thought to myself, especially after closing arguments, I thought to myself that there was reasonable doubt on the homicide. Maybe not the arson, maybe not the mutilation. I could see the jury perhaps, convicting on those counts. The exposure on, in terms of how much prison you could do for the arson, it's 18 months maximum. The mutilation of a corpse, if I recall, is 7.5 years maximum. So, I mean, we're talking under 10 years as a maximum sentence if you beat the murder. With the lack of blood, the lack of DNA, the lack of any real coherent narrative by the prosecution of what happened in that house. And again, maybe it's just too hyper-technical at the end of the day, but I thought to myself, our best strategy is to remind the jurors separate verdicts on separate counts. The homicide has to be looked at differently than the arson. What is their proof of an intentional act? And I thought even the fact that the prosecution amended, they didn't amend, but they got what's called a lesser included for a reckless homicide. And they were saying to the jury in closing, if you don't convict on intentional homicide, here's a reckless homicide you could convict on. But there was no more evidence of recklessness than there was intentional. They went out together. The night was normal. Everything appeared on the surface to be coherent and normal and not hostile. There was no motive to do this. There was no planning that I could see behind it. So I thought, all right, the jury acquits him on that charge. And that's certainly what we wanted was to win on all counts if possible, but the homicide in particular carries mandatory life. So that was the strategy, raise points of doubt. Each bad piece of evidence, try to neutralize it and try to remind the jury that they have the burden of proof to show his intent to kill, how he did it, where he did it, what weapon was used, the manner and cause of death. That's their burden.
The public did not know that they had met the prior weekend. So the last time she was seen alive was on a Tuesday. Some surveillance video or security camera footage was released from Victor's. They actually met that previous Friday. She walked in by herself. She ended up walking out with Maxwell Anderson. How soon did you have that information and that evidence? Because the public just found out maybe in the last couple of weeks that they actually knew each other prior to their first quote-unquote date.
Well, I have a client who can tell me things, so I had that information on day one. I mean, I knew he had walked her out to her car. It was he escorted her out. It was, again, normal. Nothing weird about it. Nothing that looks suspicious that I could see. They exchanged phone numbers. They texted. They lined up a time to go out. So, yeah, I knew that right away.
I think it was less than an hour, somewhere around 50 minutes, the jury deliberated. I know they have all these theories for, if a jury deliberates for this amount of time, they're leaning toward this, or if it's this amount of time, they got to come back, the next week and deliberate.
Right.
When you got word that they were done, they reached a decision. I mean, did you know?
I knew he was guilty and everything. Yeah, the second I heard it the next morning when we got to the courthouse at 8 o'clock, I brought donuts for the press. I was just sort of easing into the day and getting started with things. And within an hour of being there, they said there was a verdict. I thought to myself, maybe there was a 1% thought in my head where they just all decided the murder hadn't been proven. But in my gut, I suspected it was going to be a guilty verdict.
What is your thoughts personally on Maxwell Anderson? I've never asked a defense attorney about what they think about their clients, but knowing everything that you know and the amount of time that you spent with him and the details that you had to sort through, do you have an opinion on him as a person?
I thought there was the tenant who testified at trial, and he talked about projects being started at the house and not finished, and I think there is a there's a good side and a bad side to every person. No matter how bad something they did is or are accused of doing, I found in the course of my career, and I've represented some really horrific people in the past. I've always found with everybody I represent, I always end up finding things I like about them. As bad as that, people might not like to hear that, but that's the way I am. I always try to look on the positive. I always try to find good characteristics about people. Again, maybe I draw negativity for saying it, but I enjoyed some of our discussions. I enjoyed getting to know him. Quite honestly, there was a lot of people that were reaching out to me who knew Max in the past, and they were saying positive things about him. Hey, I worked with him for 10 years at the various bars. He's a nice guy. He was always walking people out to their car if they needed it. He was a good bartender. He was a reliable friend. So I had people reaching out to me with positive things that they were saying about him. So I would say that. I'd say that like every client I found there to be positive characteristics with him.
Defense attorney Tony Cotton most recently represented Maxwell Anderson in the death and dismemberment of Sade Robinson. Tony, thank you for being here and sharing this information with us. I know you absolutely didn't have to. I know that you want to put this behind you, but we really do appreciate you being here and giving us some insight and some details.
Thanks for having me, Sherwin.
All right, thank you.
All right.
The Truth with Sherwin Hughes on 101.7 FM. We'll be right back.
The Truth with Sherwin Hughes returns after this on 101.7 The Truth app, and 1017thetruth.com.
Truth Nation, Gruber Law Offices, and The Truth have raised